I'm Allie with PotomacBeads.com, and today I want to show you a nice modern twist on a nice spiral rope. And this is going to be a peyote tubular spiral that we're going to be working on with some leather, establishing some lines and gathering some different materials. Hopefully this inspires you to try out your own grouping and your own patterns in that fun tubular Celinni spiral version. So join me and gather your supplies, which are listed at the beginning of the video. And if you need them, remember they're in the links at the description of the video that you can shop online with us at PotomacBeads.com and PotomacBeads.eu. To begin your Celinni, you're going to want to start out with a stop bead. The stop bead here is going to be a bead that's not included in your project, and you want to make sure to definitely use an off-colored bead. That way you don't get confused as you start this tubular twisted peyote. I'm going to go through that bead 2 times, leaving about a 3-inch tail at the end. If you do not know peyote stitch, you may want to watch one of the peyote videos before attempting to go in and do it in the tubular or in the round. As we create this design, it's going to get tighter and tighter as far as our thread pulling. You may want to go back after we get started and actually take out the first 2 or 3 rows, which tend to show a little bit more thread as it establishes its spiral and its tubular shape. We're going to begin by adding basically the smallest beads to the biggest beads. I want you to begin with 3 of your Delica beads, 2 11-0 seed beads, 2 of your Czech pearls, which they are 2 millimeter, 2 of your 8-0s, which are going to be the next in size, and they're Aztec gold, and then 2 of your 2x3 millimeter Rondelles. So the only bead we added 3 of was the Delica at the beginning. From there, you're going to add 2 more of your 8-0s, 2 more pearls, because what we're doing is we're downgrading now so we get that nice spiraling effect with that middle, the crystal, popping up. Then I'm going to add my 2 Miyuki 11-0s in the eucalyptus color. From here I want to establish a roundedness to it and establish that loop. So what I'm going to do is go back towards the starter bead. I'm going to sew through that first Delica bead and come around in a circle. That circle that you create is actually going to be the diameter of the actual piece. So if you want to make it bigger, you can add some extra 8-0s, you can add some extra 11-0s in an alternate color, that's up to you. That'll make it thicker. If you want to make it thinner, think about that too, what you want to delete from this. You do want to go gradually larger so you don't have a ton of thread showing if you do want to change up the count. I just want to show now as you're kind of establishing your line here of your peyote stitch and getting that nice spiral, you're just going to keep working your way around, always adding in whatever bead you're sewing out of, adding in that spiral. And it is a lot of beads. You do use a fair amount of thread because you're thinking that you're basically covering the surface of multiple bracelets. You can also keep this in a flat peyote stitch rather than the rounded. And to establish that, you basically wouldn't sew it into the round. That's it. And then you zigzag back and down the bracelet. So going around the edge here, you can see I basically use it as a thimble that it sits on my finger. And I go around, spiraling around and adding in my beads. So as you spiral, you'll be able to start to see that effect. And again, as you get that first row established and that spiral goes the whole way around, you'll really start to see it take shape. And it's just a matter of patience and time, going in, working your way around, and adding in all of the beads that you're sewing into, making sure that as you add the beads, especially the gold ones kind of next to, you can see at the end of each, I'm not pulling on my needle, I'm pulling on my thread. I don't want to pull on the needle portion where the thread is, because what that's going to do is weaken the thread right by the needle. So always make sure I'm pulling on my thread, not the thread at the needle. And then as I was saying, and you pull those 11 O's, or the 8 O's rather. You want to see how they're kind of sitting flat right now? We're going to almost push them back a little bit, forcing our crystals to sit up. Continuing around, this will become, like I said, easier and easier as we establish that nice first twisted row and as your spiral gets bigger and bigger. Again, this is 2 rows of peyote stitch that we'll be doing. I'm going to sew through my second Delica, and we're going to begin our nice spiraling effect. To begin the spiraling effect, you are going to be adding whatever bead you are sewing into. That's the bead that you're going to add. So I'm doing peyote stitch. I just happen to be doing it in the round. I'm adding an 11-0 seed bead because I'm going to sew into the first 11-0 seed bead. Next, I'm going to add a 2mm purl because I know that I'm sewing into a 2mm purl. Continuing around this circle, that's going to be the trend. Next is an 8-0. And I'm going to sew through the first 8-0. So again, if you know peyote, makes it much easier. You're skipping a bead and sewing through the next. So I'm skipping the second 8-0, adding the crystal, and sewing through the next crystal in line. Going around here, then it start to downgrade, add an 8-0, and sew into the 8-0. From here, we pick up a purl, and you're going to sew into the next purl in line. You can see the beads are kind of pushed out to the edge. That's why I said you may want to at some point take off the first 2 rows because you do get a tighter pull as we establish the actual tubular shape. Going into the eucalyptus bead then, I'm going to add another one of the 11-0s, and we're going to start that spiral. The spiral itself is going to begin because we are kind of skipping a bead in that actual spiraling effect. What I'm going to do is sew through my first, so I'm right there at the beginning. I'm going to actually skip over that first 11 and I'm going to sew through my first Delica bead. I'm coming out the Delica, but I also need to add my next Delica to my step up. So I'm going to add a Delica on that I have there already established. And rather than adding the Delica bead on, going through that bead adds that as the actual starting row. Then I'm going to continue on my circle, adding my 11-0. And you can see that nice shaping starting to take place. I want to make sure that my stop bead is not mixed in. And again, the beads are still kind of spiraling outward. What I'm going to do is make sure as I do this row, which is actually my 4th row of peyote stitch, that as I do this row, I'm going to make sure to kind of push the beads up along the top. So when I'm working with them, I'm going to start to take my fingers and move them up. Some people even prefer to bead around a dowel. I'm not crazy about that. I like to hold it in my fingers. After you get about 7 rows on, it becomes much easier to hold and very easy to kind of establish your line. Before you get one whole spiral, it will look like the count is a little bit off and that your twisted tube here is not sitting so nicely. So that's where it becomes difficult because people think they're doing the wrong counts or the wrong numbers or sewing into the wrong bead. Just as you establish this 4th row, try to start establishing that tube shape. So you can see it there. You also want to keep in mind that the crystal beads are going to kind of jet out towards the middle because we are going dramatically from a smaller bead to a bigger bead. And I'm just adding the color that I'm going into. I'm going to add my gray there. So into my next bead. Coming out that peyote stitch then. What I'm going to do is give a nice tight yank. You can see now you have that nice spiral established, starting to get that tubular shape, and as you add a couple more rows, you'll get that tubular shape even more. Again, keep in mind that you want to kind of pull back the beads next to the crystals so that way they are tighter and not showing as much thread. Once you're done seaming up your Celinni and just getting rid of those thread ends, if you don't have a thread burner, I would definitely recommend it. I ended up with about 5 twists of my spiral here, and I did use almost 2 full strands of the 2x3mm Rondelles. You then need to decide what kind of cording you're going to put it on, if you're going to do chain, if you want to do a seed beaded say herringbone rope. I like the really modern look of adding the leather and the cording to it, just like this other one here, which is a little bit shorter and then has beads kind of stopping. I'm going to use some of our new cork cording. So this is 3mm cork, and I want to double it through the project. To end it, I have on some gold-plated flat kumihimo ends, and these are a 10mm. I'm going to put the ends in that I have kind of on both sides. Do a little super new glue. I have a jump ring that I've attached an extender chain so that way I can use this. The cording comes in 1 meter. I'm going to use the whole entire thing. So I'm going to cut it in half. It actually gave me a good idea, though I don't have it cut it in half yet, that this would be really cool to do a smaller piece and then have something hanging almost like a lariat style. So there's a little challenge for you if you get started. And then with this kumihimo end, I'm just going to flatten it out. You can use a little bit of super new glue if you want to make sure that it establishes in there. The nice thing is it's grabbing on the cork and it has little edges in there to grab on. On the other end, once I have that flattened out, I'm just going to push my piece down along and kind of move it to the end. That way here when I get to the other side of the cork, which is currently just doubled over, I am going to slice it right in half with my wire cutters. Pick up my other end of my kumi ending, put my cording in there, and I have a lobster on this end established since I'm using that nice extender chain. So that way I can make it 16 inches or I can make it down to 20 inches. Nice and flatten that out. And then I'll drop a dab of glue in there just for the fun of it. And you can add some wire in this design here. One of the girls added some wire to kind of make it hold that piece of Celinni in space. Again, you could use it as an actual little kind of lariat, and you have that nice established clasp at the end. So simple once you get done this nice piece of your actual tubular spiraled peyote. And you can change up the design and change up the count, which is going to change the thickness and kind of the look of it. In this design piece right here, just to show you, it's 1 row of Delicas, then 3 different 8/0s of different colors, and then a row of 6, and then it downgrades, versus doing the pearls in there, which are kind of the off size, that 2mm, and then the crystal in the middle. So you can really play around once you get it established. Sometimes it takes, 2 or 3 tries to get the correct count for what you want and the thickness that you want to have as well. So I know it's one of those, you may have tried it. If you don't want to do a full bracelet, do a fun piece like this in a really modern way by adding it on leather and making it look very, very kind of stylish, I think. So I'm excited actually to wear this piece myself, and having that cork in the middle I think just brings in more of that very trendy bohemian look. Again, if you need any of the materials, you can go back to the beginning where we kind of listed them off. I did use, again, 2 strands of my 2x3mm Rondelles in that transparent blue. I used my Aztec Gold 8/0. The 2mm are the Czech pearls in the shiny cream. And again, you may want to get 2 strands of those depending on how many you want to go through. And then I have the 11/0 Miyuki in the Duracoat Eucalyptus, and I have the Delica in the 11/0 in that transparent or that opaque gray color. And then you need your leather, your cording, and whatever ends you want to have on there. I chose to use 0.006 white wildfire thread along with a size 10 needle, and made sure that I had my thread burner in hand. That way I could tuck the ends in and burn them down nice and tight. Hopefully this gives you some ideas, inspires you to get more creative and kind of learn from doing this tubular peyote how to make it your own and establish your own patterns as well. As you end that last piece then of your peyote stitch, what you want to do is actually kind of tighten it, and I'm going to close up that loop a little bit just so it's not kind of flared at the end. To close it, I've gone through one time to make it just a little bit smaller, and instead of adding a crystal in the place where I would normally add a crystal, I added an 8/0 seed bead. As I progress here, again, I'm going to kind of close it up one more little time, but as I go around, I'm adding in my beads. I have one of my pearl beads on. I'm going to put that on. And then I'm going to do, I like that gold color, so that's why I'm using that as kind of my closure for my 8/0. And my findings are going to be gold as well, so it makes natural sense. I'm going to add in my 8/0. I'm going to add in my 8 again, which is going to go where the crystal bead normally would be. And as I do a little grab, I'm establishing those gold beads basically as my ending row. So I'm going to go through, and I have those gold beads that, again, I'm going to skip the pearl now even. And going through here. And there we go. So I have kind of 4 gold beads that I added in last instead of that pearl. If you want to, then you can also go through and kind of spiral out and finish that. Just those Delicas go in and the 11/0s. And that's going to be kind of my final ending to that spiral. I'm going to go back to the opposite side and do the same thing. So if you need to, you can add thread. Again, if you want to take off kind of those first 2 rows, you can do that. But I just want the ending to be just a little bit smaller. That way it doesn't look like it's super flared out at the end. So I'm going to tie off the thread here, and tie an extra piece on rather, and establish that. When you do get to the end of the peyote stitch, if you want to, you can kind of sew back down along the peyote without adding any beads. So I'm just going to sew down that eucalyptus a little bit. And what that's going to do too is get my thread further away from the end. Then I can tie a knot, pull that knot kind of in towards the middle of the project. And it's a good idea to tie a knot if you are using white thread and you happen to be using a lighter bead, like I'm using the pearl. It's a good idea to try to tie that white thread near the white bead. I'm just going to go and try to go underneath one of these peyote bridge threads, wiggle my needle out if it'll let me. Coming through then. I'm going to sew a quick sewer's knot around that you won't see it, and then burn off that thread end. If you want to, you can also glue down that thread end. That's kind of up to you. That's going to close off that one end of my peyote stitch, and now again I'm going to go through, add some thread, and do this side as well. So I'm going to add on my thread by just taking my new thread, tying it around onto my old thread, and giving a nice tight pull, getting them down next to one another, and then tying the 2 thread ends together. Once I have those 2 thread ends tied together, like I did on the starter side, I am going to downgrade a little bit as well. Try to push the knot again towards the middle, because you're never going to see it in the middle of that Celinni or that peyote. I already have the needle established then on there, and to start the downgrade, I'm going to take a gold, go into my pearl, and then basically, continue that line where I go in the eucalyptus. And then I'm going to go in with my Delica, go in with another 11/0, just like I would be adding onto the peyote. And then instead of the pearl, I'm going to stick on one of my gold beads to establish gold as my last line. Add a gold bead where the gold bead's supposed to be. Instead of adding a crystal, add a gold bead and go through the crystal. So you can see how quick this can get. Go through that outer line then, adding in that last kind of row of gold. And then as I add that last row of gold, I'm going to add my last couple little seed beads, my 11, my Delica, and my 11. And basically I'm just making my sides match. And again, just closing it up so it doesn't have a huge flare going on. Going in here then, I have my last gold bead that I'm going